Hey, Bill, how's it going over there?
Good, Faisal. Good to talk to you.
Hey, appreciate you taking time meeting with me, and I'm really interested in or excited in learning a lot from you for today.
Awesome. Me as well.
The first question I want to ask you is, what does it mean to be human? What does that mean to you?
To be human, that's a great question. So, my work, a lot of my work as an archaeologist is looking at really answering that question by looking at our evolutionary past through literally millions of years. And I think one of the things that people very much, and we've wanted to do this for some time, and I don't know why we want to do this, but we really want to separate ourselves from the rest of the animals on the planet. And it turns out that's a very difficult thing to do. We come up with the ideas like, okay, what it means to be human, or what's different about humans is that we make and use tools. Well, there's a ton of other animals that make and use tools, or that we communicate at on a certain level. Well, animals communicate on lots of different levels. So every time we come up with one of these ideas, they always get broken down or torn down at some different level. But the best thing that I've heard, and believe it or not, about what it means to be human, or let me say it better, what makes humans different than other animals, is the way that we share and consume food. And I know that sounds strange because you might be thinking it's about love, or it's about this, or no, it is about food. And this is the example that is given typically. So a lot of other animals eat at the same time, right? You put food down, and a lot of animals are eating at the same time. You see hyenas and buzzards, attacking a carcass on the African savannah, or if you put food down and you have five dogs, you're all eating at the same time. But sharing food, the act of sharing food, is something that's really unique for humans. And think about the situation that we create, and we take great pains to create. You take a bunch of hungry humans and
Mhm.
you take a table and you surround it with chairs, and in the middle of the table you put food. And for other animals, putting food in the middle of a group of hungry ones is a recipe for disaster, right?
Sure.
They all dive in and fight one another for it. But humans do something different. Like, we sit around a table hungry with food in the middle of it, and we do two things in addition to putting the food there that is a possibility for all-out melee, and there's signs of aggression. First is eye-to-eye contact. Animals that engage in eye-to-eye contact is typically a sign of aggression. And if you pair that with showing teeth, then again, all-out melee ensues. But we humans, we gather around a table, we put food in the middle of it, we look at each other eye to eye, we open our mouths, show our teeth, and then engage in one of the most amazing sensual humans experiences ever, nourishing one another. And while doing so, we nourish not only our bodies but also our souls. And not to get hokey, but it's true, that's what we do. So there's a lot of things that are amazing about humans, but one of the things that, to answer your question, that makes us unique is the way that we share food. And I think it is so incredibly powerful, because it actually is involved with every part of our human experience, the way that we deal with food. In fact, one of the things I like to say is every time that we take a bite of food, we are expressing to the world around us who we are. The way that we purchase food, process food, share food, eat food is wrapped up in everything that we are. It speaks to our socioeconomic status. It speaks to our family traditions. It speaks to our religion. It speaks to our politics. It speaks to how we view the world around us and the human's place in the environment. It speaks to how we think about our own health. Every time we take a bite of food, we do that. So it's such an incredibly human activity that's my answer.
All right. No, it's it's a really good answer. I feel like the word presence needs to be, is that part of your answer as well when you're saying that, when people are together on the table looking at each other and eating, there is a spiritual aspect to it, correct?
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Do you feel like that's an issue nowadays where everybody's more transactional? They're watching TV on their cell phones or their digital devices while they're eating. Do you see issues where um, that today's people could take a little bit something from the past when they eat?
I do. In fact, all of my work is spent, all my research is looking at how we, well, really, I'm sure we'll talk about this, how we processed food in the past to make it as safe and nourishing as possible for our bodies. But I don't lose sight of the fact that, yes, that human aspect of coming together, that presence, that spiritual component of it all is part of that meal, and is certainly part of what trying to reach genuine health really means. It's not just how much protein or carbohydrates we put into our bodies, but all aspects of what it means for us as humans to eat and share meals. I mean, it's so important. Yeah, and we try to mask what we consider advancements in food and the way we consume food and inconvenience. What is it, 7-Eleven, or I forget who, maybe it's Wawa, one of the convenience stores, talk about the dashboard diner. The idea that, oh, it's amazing, and now we can run in, grab our lunch, throw it on top of the car, actually drive and get back to work faster as we're eating this food out of a box, is a wonderful thing. In my mind, it's the exact opposite. But then you have places like Korea, where there's been such a push, like around the rest of the world, for young college graduates, kids in their 20s, and all, trying to navigate what it means to be a modern person in a modern world, chasing down the dollar in their careers, which often means in some cases that they're eating alone, but they realize that there's something more to it. So there's been an entire industry in Korea of it's called mukbang, where there are internet celebrities or social media celebrities that you pay to eat with you virtually. So you sit down by yourself in your little apartment, and you're eating your food, and you're actually watching somebody else eat at the same time as you to virtually have this. It certainly isn't an answer, but to me it really expresses that need for us as humans to do this incredibly essential thing as in a communal way.
Well, I think that puts what you just described, it's under a spotlight now with COVID. When people who are now living and working in their apartments, especially if they're single, that's even more hands where they're by themselves. They can go, well, nowadays they can, but let's say 3-4 months ago, they can't go to a restaurant. So they're eating by themselves for the whole summer. And it does have a mental impact. And then, with that ideology that you have, do you have certain rules when you eat with your family, or do you have certain focuses that, okay, the family needs to eat together at least once a day or once a week? Because I know your kids are not in college yet, but they're getting there. So are there any rules that you have that hopefully it gets passed down when they go to college?
Sure, there's several rules surrounding food and meals. One is we don't, and I'm not a big rules person. I really believe that we convey messages and ways of acting best when the person who we're trying to teach or coach buys into the whole thing for really good reasons. But we certainly do have some rules, though. One rule is we sit down whenever possible to eat meals. And now I have right now a 17-year-old daughter, a 15-year-old son, and a 13-year-old daughter.
Wow. Okay.
They are not in college yet, but they're living in the house, but they're engaged in 1,000 different things, as most kids are today. So it's something we can't always do every day, because soccer practice and field hockey practice and whatever other things we're all engaged in. But I would say that we probably sit down for a meal together almost every day. I mean, 5 out of 7 days. And even when we're not, we've made sure that we've had quality time together. It's really important to me. So much gets conveyed through a family meal in addition to nutrition. How to act, how to share time with somebody else, how to listen, how to speak, how to have manners, all of those things, how to make sure that you realize that you are loved and that people around you are loved by you. All of those things are conveyed through a family meal. And when we get rid of that important component, especially in our busy lives, it's hard to replace that with other things. So that's number one. Number two, we don't have any technology at the table. Almost every time. Every now and then there's a conversation we have, like, listen, on Thursday we have to do this, and then we have to have a question about the weather. So my kids will ask, is it okay if I get my phone and check the weather? And that's really important. It's so easy to get lost in that. Or the person at the table that doesn't have something to share that day to just get lost in the media. But in addition to the actual sitting down for the meal, which I think is incredibly important, it's the family is engaged as much as humanly possible with all the other constraints of modern life, with preparing that meal and cleaning up afterwards. So
Oh,
it's not
wow.
just the meal; it's all of it
Wow,
that we try
that's
to.
powerful.
It is, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah,
My wife and I have careers. The kids are involved in all sorts of different things. COVID has thrown a wrench into so much and changed so
right.
many things. But we it's one of the most important and most prized parts of our day.
Yeah, you make it work. I
Yeah.
mean, you just make it work. That's just the way it is. Wow, that's I don't know if many families do that in preparing together the meal as a family, eating as family, and cleaning as a family, which is a perk for having kids, especially teenagers, healthy with the elbow grease and whatnot. But the one thing back to rules is it's safe to say that you like to break the rules because you have a very unconventional career path.
Yes.
Because I was looking you up, and I mean, you worked on reality TV. You basically, in my opinion, feel free to correct me, that you created your own career. I mean, because
Mm.
prehistoric technology is not a major; it's not a study. You made it your study, and
Mhm.
you had a very interesting past where health wasn't a priority. Then, sometime in high school, it became a priority, and then it became your push for the rest of your life. So if somebody asked you, "Hey, Bill, what do you do?" How do you answer that?
It's crazy because I could answer that question right now, and in 2 months I might have a slightly different answer. I'll say a couple things. It's a hard. That might be the hardest question you asked me
All
through the
right,
whole thing. But
sure.
I think the answer to it, if I can articulate it well, is just as valuable. I interviewed. Do you know who Pete Evans is? He wrote he produced and did the movie The Magic Pill.
Okay,
He's
yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
Australian sort of nutritional coach and health expert and
Hmm.
chef, and he's got like 23 cookbooks, several movies, a bunch of stuff, several documentaries. And I interviewed him, and at the beginning of it, this is about a year and a half ago, I started the interview and I started to sort of read off the little piece that I put together to introduce him, and he stopped me. He stopped me in my tracks, which I was new at interviewing,
Right.
and it kind of set me off, off my course a little bit for a second. And he said, "Listen, I'm Pete Evans. I'm a human, and that's it."
Yeah.
And I talked to him later afterwards, and I said, "What was that?" Because it kind of, I almost took it as almost rude in the beginning of it. But he's like, "No, no, no. I don't want to be pigeonholed into somebody else's category of what I am. I do what I do," and I've really appreciated that approach. I certainly have, for a number of reasons, some intentional and some just because of situational. I've certainly followed my own path, and for a large part of that time, I felt incredibly lost. It took me 10 years to get my undergraduate degree, partially because I went blind during that time and had to get corneal transplants. But um, there was a large amount of that time where I felt incredibly helpless, or at least didn't know where I actually fit. I didn't fit into it neatly into one category, and it was a hard place to be. But every now and then, something happened that reinforced the idea that I was following a path that was worthwhile and that was my own path. That I it sort of reinforced that I was doing the right thing. So I started my first semester in college in 1991. I was recruited to wrestle at Ohio State, and I started as a nutrition major. That was my first semester as a declared major. And I realized I was trying my best without a whole lot of guidance to figure out how all of these questions I was trying to answer about how to become healthy and how to interact with my environment, where to get my food from, and how to cook. I loved cooking, all these things. I was an athlete. All these things I was trying to tie together. And I figured, of course, it's nutrition. And I started in the program, and this has nothing to do with Ohio State's nutrition program. It's just the program and series of studies for a nutrition major. I didn't agree. It didn't feel like the right fit for me. So I struggled through a lot of different majors, ended up finally getting a PhD in anthropology, archaeology, with a focus on, like you said, ancestral technologies. There was one year or one period of time when I really didn't think I was going to graduate as an undergrad, that I almost dropped out of school I failed out one time, I dropped out one time, and I almost dropped out a second time to go to culinary school in New York. Took the entrance exam, got accepted, all that, and I didn't do it. And I'm so glad I didn't, because I've sort of, my route or my path to cooking and my path to nutrition really started when I really started doing it for real through an archaeology anthropology lens.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry that I would be in a completely different, not a bad place, just a different place if I had approached it completely through a traditional nutrition program or through a completely, standardized, culinary program. I would have missed a lot that I find very valuable. So I went through this archaeology anthropology track, and at one point I realized, and this was about 12 or so, 15 years ago, that I realized that it all comes together, like it all works. Anthropology, archaeology, health, nutrition, foraging, hunting, cooking, all of those things comes together in this. And I don't want to jump ahead necessarily, but this is what we realized. Almost every single prehistoric technology has something to do with food. So we started making stone tools 3.3 million years ago. And then we developed hunting technology and fire technology and a whole bunch of other things. But almost every single technology we invented for the majority of millions of years has something to do with food. Getting food, processing food, storing food, sharing food, consuming food, whatever, redistributing food. And if that's true, which I'm convinced that it is, then it must have had an incredible influence on our diets. And if it had an incredible influence on our diets, then it probably played a very large role in supporting this evolutionary path to us becoming humans. And it did. And here's the thing that I've come to realize, which is the basis for all of my work now. We are, as humans, incredibly weak. We don't have much going for us biologically, right? We have incredibly weak nails. We're not that strong. We're not that fast. We can't see that well. We can't jump very high. We can't fly. We can't dig into the ground. There's all these things we can't do that when you really think about it at its basic level, they would be ways that we could get food. We can dig in the grounds for tubers. We can jump up in the air and grab things. We can climb real easily and grab honey and eggs, or we can, chase animals down and rip them apart or whatever. We can't do these things. So we require technologies to access most of the nutrients, most of the nutrient bearing foods in our environment. But even more importantly, we have an incredibly inefficient digestive tract. And even when we can use technology to get these resources from the environment, we aren't built naturally to safely and effectively digest those foods. Other animals are. Like a cow has a 4-chambered stomach. The first chamber is entirely dedicated to fermentation. So they can take, and they're designed to eat grass and other really tough vegetable material, break it down through a combination of chewing the cud, which means they take these huge teeth and this corrugated palate, grind it, mechanically break this up, swallow it, start it fermenting in this chamber in its stomach. They chew the cud, which means they spit it back up and they throw up in their mouths. They chew it some more and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And finally, when it's broken down properly, they can have access to the nutrients in it. We can't do that, but we eat massive amounts of vegetables, right? We don't have things like a crop and a gizzard that geese have that allow them to take grains and ferment them and soak them and sometimes sprout them and then grind them up and safely digest them. But we eat massive amounts of grain. So how do we do it? Well, we do all of those things outside of our bodies before we eat them. So almost every single technology, prehistoric technology, has something to do with accessing food and the nutrients in that food safely and effectively. In fact, they're increasing the safety, nutrient density, and bioavailability in those foods. Modern food processing is the exact opposite, right? We're now creating technologies. The modern food industry creates technologies not to make your food safer and more nourishing. And I don't mean safer like it's got E. coli and going to make you sick safer. Yeah. I mean, overcoming the inherent dangers in food. So make food safe and as nourishing as possible. It's not what it's doing. It's doing things like increasing shelf life or storability or uniformity or sugar content or whatever in foods so that people make money it increases shelf life, but at the expense of nutrients. So to me, what I consider eating like a human is engaging in those technologies. Some of them are incredibly simple yet powerful, something like fermentation, to take the food that we're eating and make it as safe and nourishing as possible before we put it in our mouths. That is the approach to food that built us as humans. And that's the approach to food that I believe we have to get back to in order to live our best lives.
Yeah, I'm seeing that problem. I'm going to digress a little bit because I sell, well, not I sell, but I do the keto diet.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I noticed is that everybody wants the quick fix, that rather than eating healthy fats like the avocados, the avocado oils, high cut fat meat or high fat cut meat, beef organs, you got to love your liver, that they take these keto bars, which is basically a $2, $3 candy bar because it has erythritol, some artificial sugar, alcohol in there with not even MCT in it, but it's just some kind of ingredients that are loaded with preservatives, and it's just a cheap way for them to have a candy bar, yet still being ketosis. And I'm just seeing that, especially with all these fads, that everybody wants to take the shortcut and not take the extra 10, 15 minutes and preparing a quality meal so that they could benefit what keto does or ancestral eating does, or any other type of diet that I see out there. Everybody wants it in a nice little wrapper in a $2 candy bar that they could eat and still tastes like birthday cake, And
that's such a great point. Not only do I believe people miss out on genuine nutrition when that shortcut is taken, but they miss out on all those other things we started this conversation with. I love sitting down and sharing a meal with my family, but I might even enjoy more if at least not as much or about the same, the preparation that goes into it, the cooking together, the conversations around it, and passing that information on, to my kids or whoever else that we're cooking with. You're missing out on all those things. So I realize, and this is the marketing advertising world that is marketing this, that they're fooling the public into thinking that creating real food takes massive amounts of time. It's beyond, don't worry about that. Let us take care of that for you. Right. Don't you worry yourselves with this. Spend your time doing other things, which typically translates into people working longer. And we'll give it to you in a nice little wrapper. And the reality is, listen, yes, preparing real food from scratch takes time. And I'm not suggesting that everybody listening, I'm very fortunate. I have a job and a career that allows me to integrate both what I'm passionate about, what I'm doing for work, what I want to do with my family, all that gets meshed together. And I realize how incredibly fortunate I am. But I also have a lot of time constraints as well. And much of the way that we approach food, again, I would say the word processing or preparation in our house, is so ingrained in our daily activity that we don't even recognize some of it's happening. Like, before I go to bed, I'll refresh the kefir. If we're making yogurt, I'll do that real quick before I go to bed, or we'll refresh the sourdough mother. And we just do this, as we're loading the dishwasher, as we're doing this, it's routine. Yeah. It's like brushing your teeth. So once you get into a routine, it's not this incredibly, time consuming, oppressive thing to do one of the most important things we can do, nourish our families.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the beginning when I started cooking, I actually started making homemade bread. And in the beginning, it took some time, but then once you get into it, you slash your time sometimes by 50% or even sometimes by 75 because you get into the flow. And I feel because our society, especially Western society, it's efficiency because we're busy. I think it's artificial busy. I think most of the time we're spending on the internet or our cell phones and doing whatnot. That, there's some hesitation or there's a little bit of learning curve you have to take to make, to cook liver or to cook a better quality meal with the ground beef and the avocado oil, that it's a great way just to cop out and just order in or order takeout. And I don't disagree. I think if you could change your mental mindset of like, okay, I know it's going to be hard maybe for the first or second time, but then the third, fourth, fifth, it's going to be nice and smooth. It's like riding a bike. You're going to fall down maybe a couple of times and then it just becomes natural where you just laugh at it. I mean, before COVID, I have my own business, so I work at home. So now after making bread a couple of times, I got to say a Dutch oven helps. That that it's part of your routine. It's like, all right, I brush my teeth or whatever. I'll spend, a couple of minutes to get the dough ready, and then you set it, and you do a couple of sets, you throw it in the fridge. But I'm kind of going a little bit too long. But once you start doing it a couple of times, it becomes nice and smooth. The one of the things I want to ask is that you said that the human's digestive system is weak or inefficient.
Mhm.
My first question would be, what type of diet would they have had in the past, or what type of diet would make it efficient or would work with human beings if you didn't have the processed food or anything like that to work with?
Sure. So what happened, a little bit of prehistory here to just set the stage for why
Sure.
our tracks are so small compared to what they should be. When our ancestors stood up, became fully bipedal somewhere between 5 and 7 million years ago. And when we did, our guts literally shrank in response. Because if you think about it, think not like somebody that's obese, think about like the ideal human figure. Our guts are situated in a different way than, say, a cow, right? A cow sits there, is on four legs, and has this massive gut that hangs, right?
Mhm.
And it hangs, and it's held up by a muscle called the hanger steak. That's what literally holds where it gets its name from. It actually holds the guts in suspension. Well, when we stand upright, our entire digestive tract has to fit within our pelvic girdle.
Mhm.
And it literally shrinks. So right now we have a digestive tract that is 60% the size of what a similar sized primate would have, right? So it's small. But this happens when our ancestors are incredibly small. Full-grown adults are like 3.5 feet tall. Their brains are the size of my fist. Very low nutritional requirements.
Right. Yeah.
What we do is not, listen, first off, introducing incredible nutrient dense bioavailable food into our bodies did not grow our brains and our bodies to get bigger. It supported it. Other things, there's a lot of conjecture out there and a lot of ideas about what actually was pushing our brains to get bigger and our bodies to get bigger. It wasn't the fact that we ate better food. The fact that we ate better food supported this increase in body and brain size. But it wasn't also the case that our guts got bigger to help us get more nutrition to fuel this. What happened is we were creating, this is why it's so incredibly important to realize this. We were creating technologies like stone tools that allowed us to scavenge meat from carcasses on the savannah, or spears and other things that allowed us to hunt, or fire that allowed us to process this food, or fermentation that we outgrew our digestive tracts with technology and used that technology to access the most incredible foods from our environment, and most importantly, process that food so that these inefficient digestive tracts could still have access to all the nutrients it had to offer without working too hard, or without having to have a stomach this big to eat this much of whatever and allow it to process over 2 days to break down.
Right.
We did that outside of our bodies. So what we're doing now, and why it's so incredibly important, is because we have this, I call it the can of soup effect, but I don't know what the right if there's a proper terminology to it. But the idea that we have this misconception that we pick up, this is a mason jar full of water, but pretend it's a soup can.
Yeah.
We pick up a can of soup, we look on the back of it, it's got a label, and we read it, it's got this much carbohydrates, this much protein, this much fat, this much vitamin C, this much whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
And we
Yep.
have the idea in our head that if we took the lid off, drank the whole can of soup, not only do all those nutrients go into our bodies, but those nutrients magically go wherever they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case. The case is, the only thing we can guarantee is that all that went into our mouths, and there's a good chance a lot of it comes out the other end. A whole host of things have to come into play together to make sure that that those nutrients are in a state that our body can finish breaking them down and absorb them properly, that our digestive tract is in the right place to take on these nutrients and have them pass through our intestinal walls and distribute them where they're going to be. There's a lot of things that need to come into play. And with such an inefficient digestive tract, we need to do those things before we consume them. Stephen Gundry in Plant Paradox made a really good point when he said, I'm sorry about the
No,
sun.
no, you're fine. You're fine.
Stephen Gundry wrote, I forget exactly the way he made the analogy, but he made the analogy between our digestive tracts and I think the Lincoln Tunnel. And he says, listen, our mouth is not the entry, an entryway to our body. Our digestive tracts are not the inside of our body. Our digestive tracts are a tunnel, just like the Lincoln Tunnel. You go in the Lincoln Tunnel, you don't go into the Hudson River, you come out the other end of Manhattan.
Right.
So you put food into here, a lot of things have to happen for those nutrients to be used properly by our bodies. That's what real food technology and processing is about. Breaking that food down, making those nutrients accessible and allow us to make the most of them.
So it's the food source. In other words, a vitamin C from one food source, 5 grams of vitamin C from one food source is not the same as 5 grams of vitamin C from another, right?
No, and I'm going to move over here just a little bit so you don't have a mess. Right. It's a couple things. So it's not the same necessarily from all those different places. So certainly, as we know, certain vitamins and minerals from plant resources are in a different state than they are from animal resources and are already in a state that's more absorbable by our bodies. Another thing is a lot of times with plants, and we eat a lot of plants in our house, believe me, I'm not an anti-plant person, but we do think the proper things to those plants. We recognize that literally all plants have toxins and that certain plants need to be detoxified or eaten in a certain way or in combination with other things to maximize their safety. We also realize that plants don't give up their nutrition very easily. And quite often the nutrients are locked within or inside of cell walls that our bodies have difficulty breaking down on its own. So we need to do things like ferment them or cook them in different ways. We do those sorts of things. But in addition, we also need to recognize that sometimes certain things need to be eaten at the same time as other things. So for example, milk's a great example. We take milk, we bastardize milk. We take milk, we pasteurize it, we kills off the vitamin A and D. We artificially put the vitamin A and D back in to make it look like we've done something great. Fortified with vitamin A and D. It had it beforehand. And then unfortunately, we're because the way that we think about, we're scared of fat, we have people drink skim milk thinking it's for their health, but vitamin A and D are fat soluble vitamins. So all of a sudden we've created this incredible, we started with an incredible resource, killed off 2 of its primary vitamins, artificially put them back in, took out the fat that's required for a body to actually absorb them. And most of the vitamin A that they artificially put back in is passing right through our bodies. But we're just reading, without understanding all of that, we're just reading a label and thinking that vitamin A is going in my body and D, and it's going to where it needs to go.
Do you drink raw milk? What's your viewpoint on that?
We consume raw dairy,
okay,
but mostly in a fermented form.
Right.
So,
okay.
And raw dairy is illegal in Maryland. I've spent.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Oh yeah, but my kids have gone directly from breast milk to raw milk and been on it their entire lives. So we drive and get raw milk and bring it back, which is insane to have to do that. But, if you look at most indigenous and traditional groups around the world that subsist, that have dairy in their diets, there's very few that actually drink milk. I know that's how we think about it. When we think about milk, we drink it. They almost always, not always, but almost always ferment it. And what they're doing when they ferment the dairy is they're replicating natural biological processes that all mammals engage in when they're infant mammals. And that, when you think about it, raw milk coming out of a mother is teeming with live bacteria. It actually comes out fermenting. And when we consume that dairy, we do things, our body naturally does things to slow it down and allow it to continue to ferment and continue to break down inside of our bodies, which is essential for making that dairy as safe as possible, but also allowing our bodies as baby infants to maximize the nutrients that it has to provide to us. So when we make things like kefir, we make things like yogurt, and even moreover, when we make real traditional cheeses, we are actually replicating what our bodies did when we were infants that we know many of us as adults no longer have the ability to do.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Is there a difference in your point of view between hard cheeses and soft cheeses, or you don't have a preference?
Between hard cheese and soft cheese is not so much. It's more, the longer that they ferment or the longer that they age.
Okay.
One of the big difference. So when we ferment dairy, we're relying on lactobacillus bacteria to eat the sugar lactose and produce lactic acid. So that's why some yogurts are more sour than others. They fermented longer and they produce more lactic acid. But the longer that goes on, right, the longer that bacteria eat the lactose, the less lactose is in there. So if you're one of the 60% of 60% of adult humans living today that
Right.
has some level of lactose intolerance, this is really good for you because
Sure.
you're consuming a product that or an end product that either has very little or no lactose naturally in it at all. It's been eaten, which is wonderful. But here's the thing. That doesn't happen with American cheese. That doesn't happen with shortcuts that many people take in the cheese making industry. So here, this blows my mozzarella is literally the most bastardized cheese in America. There's two ways. When you start with milk, it starts at a pH of about 5.8, depending.
Okay.
And when you ferment it, part of it, if you're making what we call a pasta filata cheese, like mozzarella or provolone or a whole host of the stretch curd cheeses, what we have to do is we have to ferment that milk down to a pH. It starts at 6.8, almost neutral, which 7 is neutral. It starts at about 6.8, and it gets down to right around 5.2, a pH of 5.2. If you heat it up, you can stretch it and make the mozzarella or provolone or whatever. And we reach that pH by allowing that fermentation to eat the lactose and produce lactic acid. And the more lactic acid is produced, the more acidic it becomes and the pH continues to drop. Well, that process takes, it depends, but about 8 to 10 hours, depending.
Right.
And during that time, a whole host of chemical and physical processes are taking place that's transforming that milk into something different, that's safer and more nutritious for our bodies. And it just so happens tastes better and has a really cool texture. But the other way to do it, which is what's often done in a lot of the modern mozzarella, is instead of allowing that fermentation to take place for 8 to 10 hours, they add something acidic. They add vinegar or citric acid or lactic acid, and it happens in an instant. What takes 10 hours can happen in seconds.
So an artificial catalyst of some sort. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not even. I wouldn't even say catalyst, because it's not producing that. It's not promoting that fermentation. It's in lieu of. Like it literally replaces it. There's no fermentation.
Just no fermentation, no nutritional. Oh, okay. I get it then. It's just.
And most importantly, if you're lactose intolerant, you might as well drink that milk as opposed to having it in cheese. There's no change in the lactose content.
Right.
Because nothing's been eaten by the bacteria.
The fermentation process didn't happen. Wow. All right. So, I did not know that at all.
Look on the back. This is very important. Look on the back of your mozzarella cheese. And I'm telling you, unfortunately, it happens most in the cheese that you think is the most genuine. I mean, go to the deli section of the grocery store where they have the cheese section, balls of mozzarella sitting in the way. Look at the back of it. If it says citric acid, lactic acid, acetic acid, vinegar, any of it, put it back down. They've done that. It's fake.
Would you be more comfortable if the cheese came from Europe? Is there a higher chance of that being more naturally processed, like the fermentation process, or are they playing the same gimmick over there?
It both. Unfortunately, most of the time it happens in the pizza industry as well. So, I started to figure this out when a lot of people were asking me, listen, I'm lactose intolerant, but I usually do good with cheeses, but pizza's like hit or miss and I can't figure it out. And it didn't dawn on me until I realized that this is what's happening. Now, it isn't to say all mozzarella cheese is made this way. What it should say on the back is milk, rennet, which makes curds and whey, and that's extracted from the stomach of unweaned, usually calves. So that's the coagulate that's needed. And then it'll say something like natural culture or bacteria or any of those things, which indicate that they've put something alive into that milk, because typically this, unfortunately, is done with pasteurized milk. So they need to introduce bacteria into it to promote that to start and to promote that fermentation. So it'll say that they put some sort of starter culture or bacteria or culture into it, which is great, and salt. That's it. So it should have milk, salt, rennet, and some sort of bacterial culture if they're not using raw milk. If they say something acidic, then it's taken a shortcut. But here's the crazy thing. Now, once you left the deli section disgusted with the gorgeous ball of mozzarella, go over to like regular cheese aisle where they have like the cheddar cheese and the sliced whatever over by the yogurt, you know, all over there, and pick up the cheese sticks. Find the cheapest cheese sticks that you can find, turn over the back, and 80% chance it's made the right way.
Really? Wow. Well, why is that? I got so many other things to talk about, but I want to talk more about cheese. Like, why is the cheap? Like, I would think the total opposite because of the packaging. You know, the round mozzarella.
I would think the same thing too, but I think it has to do. There's a couple things. When you make the mozzarella the wrong way. I'll say wrong way. Right, the shortcut way. First of all, it doesn't convey the same level of safety, especially if you're lactose intolerant, the same level of nutrition, the same flavor, the same texture, and just as importantly, it doesn't convey the same connection to a traditional food that it should. Like all those things are problematic. It also doesn't produce a final product that has the same shelf life. So fresh mozzarella already doesn't have a very long shelf life anyhow. But a cheese stick needs to sit on the shelf for a longer time. So I think there's something to that as well. But it is, and this is really, really important. And this is why one of the things I promote, I think more than anything, for people to empower themselves to eat the most nutritious food possible is to get back into the kitchen. If it cook entirely from scratch the foods that you eat all the time at least once, and you'll know more about that food than anything you'll see in a documentary or read in a book. And this is a great example. Like, make this cheese from scratch once, and you'll be able to realize and navigate a grocery store and not have to rely on, packaging and price and labeling and color. It's the thing that you think should be healthy isn't, and the thing that you think is junk food is healthier. And the same as, if you were talking about bread, goes with sourdough bread.
Right.
It is incredibly difficult to find real sourdough bread in a grocery store. It's possible in high-end ones, but for the most case, there's things that say sourdough bread on them. And if you turn them over, you'll realize that they've added that there's no national requirement for the label sourdough bread. There should be, but there's not. So what they're doing is they're actually trying to mimic
the taste,
flavor
artificial
profile,
taste.
artificial, and same thing. You'll see acids added. You'll see lactic acid, citric acid, vinegar, something added on the back of it. And if that's the case on the back of the bread, put it back. It's not real sourdough bread. It's regular bread.
Why? Because I want to talk about fat, but I want to talk about sourdough because I know you love your cheeses, and we could tell that you love the process. But because I'm sure you're very familiar with Weston Price.
Absolutely.
With sourdough bread or grain, how come you're okay making sourdough bread versus making maybe artisanal bread? Are there differences in nutritional value? Why does sourdough bread has advantage in your mind?
There's a huge difference, and here's the earliest example of anything resembling bread in the archaeological record is something like 14,400 years old. And for the entirety of the time that bread has been made, almost in every case, not every, in most cases, it's been leavened or it's risen, and it's been made using a combination of bacteria and yeast, wild bacteria and yeast that come from the environment. And it's very easy to capture the wild yeast. And this is one thing I always wonder, but where it comes from. It's everywhere. It's in the air. It's on your skin. It's on the table. It's on the wheat grains. It's everywhere, both bacteria and yeast. And the way to capture it is simply to take some flour and water, mix it up, and put it out on the counter. And it literally gets attracted, and you're feeding and growing this army of wonderful bacteria and yeast to work for you. And you put it through several feedings, and all of a sudden you have this bubbling mass of dough that has both, again, bacteria and yeast in it. Now, modern bread, most of the bread that we see at the grocery store, even the stuff we see in the bakeries, is leavened and is made using only yeast. It's a commercial yeast, it's a standardized yeast. And the yeast, when it ferments, produces two things: carbon dioxide and alcohol. The carbon dioxide allows the bread to rise, creates the pockets, the air pockets, and the alcohol gets burned off during the cooking process. The bacterial fermentation does nothing really to allow it to rise. That's the charge of the yeast. But the bacteria, when it's fermenting, transforms the grains, the wheat grains, the rye grains, the barley, whatever it is you're using, into its safest and most digestible form, period. So the health benefits are coming from the bacteria. The textural quality is coming from the yeast. And I'll also say the flavor, the unique flavor profile is also coming from the bacteria. It really adds a lot. So really good, really good sourdough bakers control not only the health benefits from the way that they deal with the bacterial fermentation, but also the flavor profile in the final bread, which I think is super cool. When we don't have that bacterial fermentation, we're not putting it through the proper processes to make it as safe and as easily digestible by our bodies, which is really significant. We are not designed to eat grains. We're not designed to eat most foods that we eat, but this is a process that we're mimicking. This is a process that happens in other animals that eat grains, other animals that are designed to eat grains. I don't mean cows, because we feed grains to cows and they shouldn't eat the grains, but something like a goose is a great example.
Right.
When geese eat grains, it goes into a specialized digestive apparatus called the crop, where the grains sit and soak and ferment. Sometimes they even sprout, and then they go down into a gizzard, which are two muscular discs, and in between the discs are the rocks that the gastroliths are called, that the birds eat on purpose. And these discs grind these grains that have been fermented, and then these ground up fermented grains go into the rest of their digestive tract, where the nutrients, because they're in the right state, can be absorbed and used by that bird's body. Other than cooking, that goose is literally making sourdough bread inside of its body. And I've wondered for a long time. I said, I wonder, knowing that these birds eat grains and do fuel their bodies safely, on them, and we eat grains, but we don't have that apparatus inside of our bodies. I'm wondering, what if it was ever able, I said, I'm thinking to myself, I'd never be able to find this out, but if we ever were able to take a grain and bypass those biological, adaptations for grain eating, and put it right directly into its digestive tract, intestines or whatever stuff, what would happen to that bird? It was just kind of an intellectual thought, and I walk away. Right. I'm never going to find out. Well, recently I found out it actually, I know what happens. The birds get sick, and there's a disease called angel wing disease, which geese and ducks get in city parks when old people, which we think is so cute, sit there and feed them Wonder Bread. Right. And what they're doing is they're feeding these birds essentially a human bastardized version of the food that they're designed to eat, but not allowing the process that's essential for them to break it down fully to take place. It's already been yeast fermented. There's no opportunity for it to do any real fermentation, and they feed it, and they actually get a malnourishment disease called angel wings, and there's
deformities and whatnot. Now because you could buy your flour from the grocery store, right? $1 a pound, whatever it is. I'm pretty sure you run away from that. How about flour from a local flour mill that keeps the wheat germ in there? Is there any difference in quality, or is it the exact same thing? Oh,
that's a great point. Here's
your answer's scaring me already.
No. They're two completely different things.
Right.
One is the raw ingredient quality, and what we were just talking about is the processing of it. So let's say this: I would rather my family eat sourdough bread made entirely of white flour than whole grain yeasted bread that doesn't have the bacterial fermentation. I don't care what kind of flour it's made from. Now, in an ideal world, it's beautiful whole grain flour with the germ in it inside of it that's been through a sourdough process. But what I'm suggesting is the sourcing of the ingredient itself is incredibly important. But what's even more important, or at least equally as important, depending on the food, is how we've processed that food before it touches our lips, because we are not biologically designed to safely consume grains that haven't been processed the right way for us. So that I would, again, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I really want to start baking sourdough bread, but the only thing I have access to is the, whatever flour at the grocery store, then get it, do it. The sourdough process is empowering, it's invigorating, it's taking that flour, making it as safe and nourishing as possible. Go do it. If you have access to the local mill that is milling it and you get the whole germ and all that, then fantastic, do that. That's a step better. But in my mind, the process in this particular case is more important than the ingredient.
The key word, the key word is fermentation. Some type of fermentation to extrapolate the nutrition.
And make it safe. So
for the digestion,
digestion, yeah. So and I'll even, I don't have anything to back this up, but I'm gonna say it. I think the same thing can be said for beer.
All right.
So we've done the same thing with beer that we've done with bread. Beer, there's a sort of a big push right now. As much as there is a big push for sourdough breads, there's a big push right now for sour beers. And sour beers, I think beer is doing the same. Forget the alcohol part of it. And we're not even sure which came first, beer or bread. But anthropologists are really arguing about this, believe it or not. But we're doing the same thing in both cases. We're taking a grain that our bodies have no business consuming, using a technology or variety of technologies to process that grain and transform it into something that has ability to deliver nutrition, hopefully safely to our bodies. One's liquid, one's in a solid form, one has alcohol, one the alcohol burns off. But beer in the past was fermented naturally using a combination of wild bacteria and yeast. That's just how it was done. And it wasn't until we separated out and isolated different strains of yeast that we have this, modern weird thing of making beer only with yeast. It used to be with yeast and bacteria. Now, some people are playing around with the sour beer thing. Some is natural, some is a little bit forced. But regardless, I would suggest, although I know for sure what I said about the sourdough, there's a lot of research to back that up.
Right.
There's no research to back up what I'm saying now. But in my mind, I believe if we really looked into it, sour beers are healthier for our bodies than just a regular beer that was only a modern beer that was made using only a yeast fermentation for the very same reasons.
All right, fair enough. If you don't mind, I want to talk about fat a little bit, or it's a two-pronged question. Are you good on time? Are we still good, or you're good?
Oh, I have 2 more minutes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Like, what do you think? I guess when you eat, what do you usually eat for dinner and lunch and breakfast for your family, and what role does fat play in that?
Fat plays a very large role, especially in my kids' diets. I do believe one of the biggest nutrients lacking in kids' diets today are the right kinds of fats. They're filled with fats, but mostly nut and seed oils, the right kinds of fats. So in our house, and I'll talk about what we actually eat in a second, but in our house, I said there's not many rules per se, but this is a rule. We have no nut or seed oils in our house. The only nut oil we have in our house is actually coconut oil, but that gives up its fat really easily without a lot of processing. So we do have olive oil and avocado oil that we use primarily in cold applications like making dressings and those sorts of things. But any cooking we do is with either butter, lard, tallow, schmaltz, bacon, grease, whatever. And that's almost across the board. So my entire family, but especially focused on my kids, they eat a tremendous amount of what I consider high quality animal fat. And if we look at the archaeological record, we have the earliest examples of our ancestors eating bone marrow,
Mm-hmm.
cracking open bones to extract highly nutritious, incredible, saturated fat bone marrow at 3.4 million years ago. And then just, increasing numbers of examples as we go through time. And as you know, nut or seed oils have been in our diets for a little bit over 100 years. So we keep them out. As far as eating our house is concerned, again, there's no hard and fast rules except anything that we eat, I do everything I can to make sure I've done everything that I can to make that food as safe and nourishing as possible. So again, ingredients, we do pay attention to things like no nut or seed oils. We don't eat a whole lot of fruit in our house. We do, it's usually berries and those sorts of things. We don't have refined sugars in our house. We really focus on eating nose to tail from the animals that we've either killed or butchered or access as directly as possible into our house. Vegetables that we eat, we've done everything that we can to make sure that we recognize that all plants have some level of toxin and that they don't release their nutrients very easily. And we keep that in mind, and we mitigate that situation by eating as seasonally as possible. We ferment a lot of our vegetables. We cook what we can, and we do a heck of a lot of foraging as well.
All right, fair enough. We only have a couple more minutes. I have like 20 more questions to ask you, so maybe another time. Man, I'm learning so much from you. I got to ferment everything basically. But if you had, let's say, $100 million invest in research, what kind of research would it be?
Man, that's an awesome question.
All right, thanks. I popped in my head a couple of days ago to ask you.
Wow. Okay, this is what I do. I would spread it out a little bit. In fact,
there's no right or wrong
answer because this is of course I'm going to answer it, to say, hey, exactly what I'm trying to do myself. This is what I put the money into. But this is where I think the money should go. Some of that money should go into, well, three things, and this is the approach that me and my family take through the research that we're doing and the message that we're trying to spend. It's a spread. Number one, we really need to have as firm a grasp as possible on the diets that built us as a species, both biologically and culturally. So I would take some of that money and invest it into really amazing archaeological research that helps us better understand and define what our dietary past was like. There are pockets of people, groups of people around the world that are still adhering to and practicing certain food traditions that are amazing and incredible, and in some cases give us a window into some of the things we see in the archaeological record. In some cases give us inspiration to do something entirely new, but in all cases these traditions are dying. They're going away. They're getting replaced by modern Western diets and convenient foods and all these other sorts of things. So I would take another bit of that money, and maybe I divide it into thirds, and go and document as much of that as possible before it's gone. Document it on film, document it in writing, gather these stories, gather the food and be able to test it to see what's happened to it, do all of that. And then, and this is just as important, and this is the main thing that we're trying to do, in addition to those two, is recognize that even though we're living in 300,000-year-old bodies that have the same nutritional requirements as we've had for that entirety of that time, we also have brains and lifestyles and a way of living today that have different expectations of the food that we're eating. Right? We're eating, we have an expectation of how it tastes and its texture, how it's presented, how it looks on a plate, all of those other sorts of things. So even if we could do the first two things that I said and come up with this amazing ideal human diet and put it on a plate in front of you, you probably wouldn't eat it more than 2 times, no matter how important you thought it, because it'd be so seemingly foreign. What we do is we take that information and take the best minds in the world, the best like Alex Atalos and Rene Redzepi's and these amazing pioneering chefs, and have them fully armed with all of this knowledge and use their skill set to produce food that encapsulates everything that it means to be human today. And that includes, again, flavors and textures and matters of convenience and price points and access to all of those things together. And that's the ideal diet for today. That's a diet that is not only nourishing and meaningful, but is sustainable, it's ethical. And you know what? The thing is, we have to realize that tomorrow we might have to make an adjustment, right? There's things that change in our environment. There's things that change in our modern culture, but we might have to make an adjustment. But I do believe this: for as amazing as we have eaten for millions of years, and listen, we have this perception, or many of us do, that our ancestors were just barely surviving and getting by. No, our ancestors are doing awesome. You don't reproduce and produce viable offspring when you're surviving. You need to be at least subsisting.
Yep.
And then on top of that, you don't start to support body and brain growth if you're just subsisting, right? You're doing really good at what you're doing. So our ancestors, there were issues, there was famines, there were people that died, a lot of things happened, certainly. But if you looked at it from a 40,000 foot viewpoint, for the most part, they were doing really, really well. We could take a lot of lessons from them. However, I will say this: I don't believe the ideal human diet has been created yet. And even when we do figure it out, it's not going to be the ideal human diet 20 years from then. So many things changes, and so many things go into what an ideal human diet is. It's not just nutrition, it's sustainability, it's ethics, it's religion, it's all the things that happen, surround what it means to consume food as humans. But I think we can do it. I know there's so many things about our modern food system that we should be really upset about. I completely agree with that. But we also have some amazing, inspirational minds attacking this problem. We have science that, if used the right way, can help create a food system that is the most nourishing and sustainable and ethical that it's ever been. And if you gave me that money, I guarantee that's where I would throw it all, and it would help.
That sounds like a eloquent pitch for you to be on Shark Tank or something like that. That you could, give me the money, we'll get the scientists and all that and find the perfect food. But let's get your message out there. If you are able to send a text to the whole world, what would that be?
Question everything.
Okay.
Question everything. There's every bit of information that you receive, including everything that I've said today, is biased. It is biased. I am certainly saying things in a way because there's a message that I want to deliver.
Right. Yes.
But it's biased. I'm human. Most of the people that are delivering nutritional messages are trying to make money. So we should question, but question everything. Question the norms in the scientific world, question the norms in the dietary world, question whether spinach is actually healthy or if it's actually full of oxalates and can make you sick. Question everything and answer that question yourself. Get back into the kitchen, learn how to cook, reconnect with your food.
And my final question is, how can people find you?
Oh, it's a great question. Okay, so my wife has been working her tail off. We just launched our new website, eatlikeahuman.com. And so www.eatlikeahuman.com, and there you'll find a ton of resources, from blog posts to links to videos. And we've just launched, in addition to the website, a series of cooking classes to help people do exactly what I'm suggesting: get back into the kitchen and learn to make food for yourself and your family entirely from scratch.
Bill, thank you so much for taking your time to talk to me. And people out there, go check out the website. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay,
Thanks.
You.